Rev up your engines!
Well, here's a fascinating thing. Toyota says they're going to bring manual transmissions to electric vehicles. Now, to me, it's a no-brainer. But to the other people, well, they don't do it. Some of them, like Porsche, there's a 2-speed transmission, right? They want to bring ones with multi-speeds in them. And you might think, why? Well, because, let me tell you something, it's logical. Go back into history. Take like Harley Davidson. They first made big old motorcycles, but they'd only go like 28 miles an hour because they had just a belt drive. You pulled the stick, made it tighter, made it go. There were no speeds. It was one speed. Well, if an engine only has one speed, it revs high. It can't go any faster because it's got one speed, one basically gear ratio. Every time the engine spins, the wheel spins so many times. That's why they invented transmissions. And Harley Davidson was basically the first real motorcycle manufacturer to come with 3-speed transmissions. Then, instead of going 30 miles an hour or less, they could go 80, 90 miles an hour, right? With electric cars. I don't know why anybody didn't do this before, but I guess it was because, well, it costs more to make a transmission, it weighs more, blah, 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 right? Well, if you have an electric motor that's spinning so fast, the faster it spins at higher speeds, they're less efficient. But they use a lot of electricity at higher speeds because the engine has to spin really fast. Why not do like Harley did with motorcycles? That engine, if it's spinning at the same speed, but it has 3-4 gears or more, then it has to spin less fast to turn the wheels, which means it's going to use less power. The slower an electric motor spins, the more efficient it is. So it only makes sense to make manual transmissions or automatic transmission electric cars that have various gears. It costs more money to make it. They weigh more, yes, indeedy. But it's a logical thing to do. Why the other companies aren't doing it? I guess they're too cheap. They don't want to do the research and development. And they realize, well, the transmission weighs more, so it can't go as far, blah, blah, blah. But they don't understand this. It really amazes me. It only makes sense. Toyota's being logical about it. Now, it's going to be in the future. It's not something they're doing right away because Toyotas, they're good poker players. They're just kind of watching how it pans out. They're not throwing all their money. They're not going all in with a hand that they don't know what the other people have. They're seeing, hey, let's see what happens to these electric cars. Maybe that thing will just fall flat on its face in the next few years because they're promising much more than they can give out with the technology as it is today. But it's only logical to put transmissions in them instead of just having a direct drive motor. The advantage of a direct drive motor, of course, is it's cheap. It's just a motor and a hub. Easy to make, cheap to make, less parts to have. And now they're not giving these electric cars away, but they sure are making them cheap. Well, VinFast, the electric car maker that's trying to compete with Tesla, just told everyone they had a $623 million loss this last quarter. This is after its wild NASDAQ debut. They did one of those SPACs. Those special acquisition stocks are garbage. Stay away from them. It's just a scam to get a bunch of money from people to make something worth money that really isn't. And in the case of VinFast, it was one of the scumbaggiest scams of all time. 99% of the stock is owned by the Vietnamese guy who's the president of the company. Right? It went up, it went down. Now it's down, of course, because people are realizing, gee, you know, they haven't sold that many cars. All this fake evaluation has gone to a banana. You know, they couldn't even do what they did in the stock market. If you know anything about the stock market, IPO, initial public offerings. Well, those are kind of a scam, too, for quite some time. Right? Originally, they weren't, but then they became just scams for people to cash out that were involved in the company. Now they want their money and they put an IPO. Well, everybody figured that out, so now they have what are called SPACs, which are even worse. And VinFast was one of them. Now, granted, the guy who owns VinFast is the richest man in Vietnam, so a lot of it because of the stupid SPAC that came out and evaluated the company worth all this money that it really isn't. Now, at the end of August, the company was valued at more worth than Mercedes and BMW, and it reached $82 a share. Presently, it's hovering at about $8 a share. Don't be fooled by these electric car companies and these ridiculous evaluations of what they're worth. It's fantasy money made for rich people to take it for themselves. themselves. Same thing with Tesla. Elon's made a fortune for himself keeping that stock up, right? Other people, not so much, you know? It's up, it's down, it's sideways, right? But of course, the guy who owns the thing, anytime you buy a share of that stock, you're handing him money. So, of course, they want to do every trick in the book to try to keep the price up, give false information. If you ever read any information about stocks, you're going to buy a stock at the very bottom. It usually says, these are forward-facing data that may or may not reflect the reality of the situation. And all this technical job to say, they may be lying through their teeth to try to get to buy the stock, right? And they're trying to make a factory in the United States. They claim they're working on what? How many of these companies have you seen? We're going to do this. And then 10 years later, well, it didn't work out okay. We didn't really do that, you know? Well, a new study has zapped Biden's plan to transform our electrical grid. You can make all the ideas and laws, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen. As this article I just read says, they state it perfectly. They believe they can simply implement laws, regulations, and executive orders, provide hundreds of billions in subsidies, and voila! The green energy transformation will proceed on schedule with no supply chain disruptions, blackouts, escalating costs, or other economic and environmental consequences. The problem, of course, is the United States electrical grid is a rat's nest. There are thousands of different companies with different rules hooking up to each other, right? The transmission lines are old as the hills, and you start adding extra electricity, it'll fry the wires, the transformers will blow up. Give you a perfect idea. Even in 2020, in Houston, Texas, in my backyard, we had power lines, right? And they were put up in the 1940s. The insulations broke off them, and they were still there on poles, right? You can't run a bunch of extra power to those things. They can barely take the stuff that they had. When there were storms, they'd pop fuses, tree branch would touch them, they go wham, because they didn't have any insulation left on them. Ginormous mess. The electrical grid. I talked to a customer here the other day in Rhode Island. He happens to work for an electrical company in Massachusetts. He was a lineman, and he said, Scotty, I spend days going hundreds of miles patching together this horrible electrical grid we have in Massachusetts. He said, there's no way you're going to run millions of cars on that stuff. It couldn't take the power, right? Bad enough there's no place the power's coming from. But even if you built the plants, then you got to get them somewhere. And that's going to cost a small fortune. And of course, what these clowns don't even start to comprehend until they get there, like where I am now in Rhode Island. Yeah, make these things offshore 35, 40 miles. Then you got to run all that electrical grid under the water for all those miles just to get to land. And then let's say they're going to Boston, then they got to go another 50-something miles down there. All that stuff's going to cost a fortune to build. Right? And if you know anything about the wind turbines, they really don't generate all that much electricity. They can give you a line of horse manure till the moon turns purple. But just like politicians, you can promise stuff. They're not engineers. They don't know anything that they talk about. I mean, like I made a video the other day. Rhode Island was bragging that by 2030, we're going to have 1,200 megawatts of electrical generation from these wind turbines, right? Then you find, well, gee, Rhode Island uses like 777 gigawatts of electricity every year. It's a spit in the bucket. And yet they're spending billions building the stupid stuff. It's inefficient. It's stupid. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Trying to replace electrical generating stations that create quite a bit of power with these tiny little things that they're going to put all over the place that cost a small fortune. And we all know, we've seen the wind turbines, they only last so long, the blades break, the motors break, they rust when they're in the ocean with their salt water. I mean, it just shows the total disconnect between politicians and the economic reality of the world. And it's only going to get worse as politicians throw money into things they don't understand because, let's face it, people, they're politicians. Whoever puts money in their back pockets, the companies that are building these things, right, they'll do whatever they say because that's how they get elected. All this campaign financing that they were supposed to fix it all. McCain said, oh, we're going to fix campaign financing. They don't fix anything. You think these guys want to get kicked out? They're elected. They're in power. They don't want to rock the boat, right? So they'll continue to waste money on crap that shouldn't be spent on. Beams 9000 said, morning, Scotty. What do you think of a 2015 Nissan Sentra 1.8 liter with a manual tranny with 130,000 miles? As I've always said, the worst thing about those are automatic transmissions. That's a manual. The thing you got to worry worry about in that car is the engine. Have a mechanic check them out. Tell them you want to do a wet, dry compression test of the engine. Then he'll see if the engine is solid or not. If it's not solid, don't buy it. If it's solid, hey, it's got 130,000 miles. It's a 9-year-old Sentra. I wouldn't pay too much for it, but it's could be a decent car in there. But you gotta check out the engine. They're notorious for blowing head gaskets, having engine problems. Have a mechanic check the engine out. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.